All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to our April Roads and Transport Directorate webinar. As I'm sure you're aware, the subject of today's webinar is on our soon-to-be released recycled pavement materials guide. I've got Muskan Soni here with me. She'll be co-presenting with me today. Muskan was the lead author on the update to this guide, so she did a lot of the heavy lifting, ably assisted by our Environment and Sustainability panel. I think a few of whom will be coming through today as well. So thanks all for coming. Now, we do have sort of the town hall set up, which means you won't be able to turn on your mic and camera, but we do have the chat and the Q&A function enabled. So if you have any questions or comments as we're going through, please pop them in either of those forums, and we'll have a sort of structured Q&A section towards the end of this webinar. All right. Well, we might jump into it, Muskan, if you're happy to share your screen.
Yeah. Let's get on. Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag today. Presentation.
Yeah, all good. Fair warning, I'm dialing in from up on the North Coast, so if my internet drops out, Muskan's assured me she'll jump in and cover for me. But, we'll make do as best we can. All right, so yeah, look, I think we've covered off on that. So go to the next slide, Muskan. We'll just run everyone through the agenda for today. So this is the agenda of the presentation that we'll be running through. A bit of an overview of the guide and what's included in it. Why we have the guide, how to use it, running through the information that's contained within the guide, and then some specifics around the data sheets and case studies in particular. And then, yeah, we'll have some Q&A towards the end of the session as well. And a couple of opportunities to engage further with this guide and sort of the tranche of research and work that we're doing around this through a few of our events and other opportunities as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the Recycled Pavement Materials Guide? You can see a picture of the cover there. It hasn't officially been released yet. We are planning to release it along with a couple of other guides at the state conference next week in the Hunter Valley. So that'll be available from Wednesday next week for those who are available there. We will probably try to get it up on the website before then, but it may not happen until the week after, just depending on how busy the team is. But the short answer is it'll be available very, very soon. By way of history, this is sort of I guess a refocusing of a previous guide that we had published, or IPWEA had published, called the Specification for Supply of Recycled Material for Pavements, Earthworks and Drainage, which is a bit of a mouthful. This was a guide that we had two previous editions of, was developed in conjunction with the EPA and really spelled out specific technical guidance around the use of certain types of recycled material in pavements. Distribution curves and gradations and the like. We've gone in a slightly different direction with this guide, owing to two factors. The last time we updated the green spec, as it was known, was I think about 2010. So it's well out of date. And what we found when we did our literature review as a part of this project was that there's been a lot of work by other bodies in the specification space. So we thought there was little value in us trying to replicate what others are already doing. What this guide is focused on then is providing that really useful guidebook for in particular council staff who want to engage with these sort of materials, hoping to point them in the right direction as to where they can go to find more information. So it's a bit of a handbook to direct you to where you want to go, but also contain some important information around things you need to consider and factor into any decisions you're making with the use of these materials as well. Muskan, anything else you want to add to that?
I think one of the things is that there's been a lot of new principles that have come up as well, particularly with the circular economy, and also considering the whole of life approach. So we'll go into that a little bit more in detail later on, especially with the costing, because with recycled materials, sometimes in the beginning the costs are high, but it's good to consider the whole of life and to see if possibly towards the end if the cost can be reduced.
Yep. Yeah, no, very good point. Right, we'll jump to the next slide, please. Okay, so I guess in terms of some background behind this guide, as I mentioned, obviously this is an update to the previous one, and it's driven largely by the need to address the waste challenge in New South Wales, but Australia more broadly. But New South Wales is obviously where we're focusing at, this context. As you can see there on the slide, some of the major landfills around the state are sort of getting close to, if not at capacity. That's creating pressures for what to do with that waste, and is certainly driving, I guess, that value proposition in terms of these, recycled alternatives become more sustainable if you're having to ship this waste, 500 k's away from Sydney, for example. But also, I think that's leading to that, as Muskan said, focus more on whole of life, circular economy, and trying to say, well, okay, can we do things differently? Can we do things smarter? And can we do them in a way that actually gives us the same level of performance, but also has, sustainable advantages to it over the longer term as well. You can see there in the little table there, the recycled pavement materials that we've looked at in this guide. So that's what's shown on the left-hand side of the screen, and on the right were the ones that were included in the last update of the spec, which is in 2010. So we've effectively doubled the number of pavement materials that we've considered this time, noting that some of these are more mature than others, and that's reflected in the data sheets in particular when we're looking at the information that's available for each of those materials. Next slide, please. Okay, so look, I think we've probably covered this, but as I mentioned before, really it's about that shift from being a purely technical document to one more around guidance and helping people navigate the wealth of resources. And I mean, I wouldn't want to put a number on it. Muskan can probably do it more accurately than I can, but there's a lot of resources out there is the short answer. So, and not just within New South Wales, there's a lot that apply nationally, other states, and obviously internationally as well. So that can be confusing, particularly if you haven't engaged with the use of recycled materials in the past. And so what we've tried to do is really condense that down to say, well, these are the critical ones that, you as a local government engineer need to be across, and, give you some guidance as to how to approach those things as well. And ultimately, I think it's about that shift from, using maybe traditional approaches with virgin materials to considering, a greater uptake of recycled materials. And we would hope to see that shift, starts to happen. I think there is also an undercurrent of probably expectation that that's going to have to happen anyway. Obviously we're seeing mandatory reporting requirements around, carbon emissions and the like being put into place at the state government level. It wouldn't surprise me if that starts to roll down to a local government level in the near future. So I think these are the sorts of approaches that all council organisations are going to have to start thinking more seriously about as that requirement starts to become more real. Next slide, please. Okay, so obviously some high-level benefits of recycled materials. There's the emissions piece. So obviously you're not producing new materials, so there's some emission savings there. Noting that one of the big ones around emissions is obviously the transportation side of it. So we've certainly not ignored that fact, and that will be, I suppose, a bigger constraint for maybe more regional-based councils, because if you don't have access to sources of recycled materials or can't get the economies of scale to make it work in your local region, the transportation costs maybe make this somewhat prohibitive. However, again, as we see this becoming a more mainstream approach, you might find that those options start to open up as well. It obviously reduces the need for virgin materials. That's quite critical, particularly with the increasing safety requirements and other requirements around any quarries. And I know the sort of sources of virgin materials in some regions are getting quite scarce as well because of that. Linked very, very closely again to the environmental impacts of pulling stuff out of the ground. There's a lot of impacts from that, and a lot of obviously regulatory barriers that you need to come across as well. And then the generation of pollution from the actual extraction process itself as well. So look, really, this circular economy focus is something that has probably emerged or become mainstream in the last, decade or so. And I think we do show it a little bit later on, but this 9Rs framework of waste management is a really good way to think about these things. So it's effectively your hierarchy of controls from, obviously the highest being if you can get away without using it, refuse to use it in the first place, right down to the lower order ones. I think recycle somewhere towards the bottom third or in the middle there, which is reflective of the fact that, there are other controls that can be put in place earlier if you can build that into your supply chains. But the focus of this guide is really on saying, well, look, everyone's going to have to build roads, everyone's going to have to maintain roads. How do you do that in the most sustainable way possible? And we think through the use of recycling some of these materials is a really good way to increase the sustainability of them. Muskan, any comments from you, or do you want to jump to the next slide?
I think mainly it tries to, I think just to add on to what you said, it's about rethinking and improving the use of recycled materials so that they stay in circulation for as long as possible. And then also looking at how exactly councils can implement the circular economy. So it's not just saying this is the circular economy and you should go and apply it, but sort of aligning it with the IPWEA Practice Note 13 to offer more so prompts and question-based scenarios to help in actually implementing the 9Rs of waste management with asset management.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, so the guide at a glance, this is sort of showing the main sections of the guide. We've got obviously the introduction, which probably largely covers the main items that we've just talked about. There's an overview of each of the 8 material types that we cover. We then go into some considerations, probably in a more general sense, that you would want to consider both from, I guess, a procurement design and construction perspective. So there's a lot of good guidance in that. There's a focus section on sustainable procurement, noting that some councils probably already have, sustainable procurement policies in place, but this is sort of looking at if you don't, or if you want to enhance that, here are some resources to enable you to do that. And a little aside at this point, what we have probably picked out of this project is that there might be a need for more focused guidance in the sustainable procurement space. And so we'll be doing a bit more work on that moving forward into the future. And then the most technical section are the data sheets, which we've included as an appendix in this report just because it was easier to sort of group them together. And that gives really the detailed technical guidance and a good summation of the other sections on sort of 3 to 4 pages for each of those materials. So that's a really good, concise technical part of the guide that people might want to pull out and use as required. We'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, so how to use the guide. So obviously, as we've sort of mentioned, pointing people towards the relevant specs and standards, some best practice approaches out there. We have been very conscious that one of the barriers to the implementation of recycled materials is often that no one wants to be the first one to try this, but also there's some concerns around what's the longevity of these materials? Will they perform the same over the longer term, or same or similar over the longer term? So we've done a lot of work, or Muskan's done a lot of work to find case studies from people who have used recycled materials, over, in some cases, 15 to 20 years, just to demonstrate that there are examples of this stuff being used and those assets performing over the longer term. It's just to try and allay some of those concerns. So, and then obviously looking at that whole of life focus of, okay, well, this is good once you put this stuff into your assets. What happens at the end of that? What are the options for again to recycle it further and to keep it as a continuous supply chain? Muskan, did you want to add anything at this point?
No, I think you've covered pretty much all of it with just sort of helping to achieve like the environmental, social, and economic outcomes through the use of the guide. And also it can be applied to all assets as well. So not just pavements, it can be applied to curbs and gutters, natural assets, and also buildings as well.
Yeah. Okay, so these are the 8 materials that are included in the guide. So we've got some of the longer term ones with recycled crushed glass, wrap, and then into some more, I guess, recent materials. We're looking at sort of fly ash, bottom ash, and the use of recycled plastic. So there's a pretty good spread there across, I guess, direct replacement to some of your pavement layers through to additives that may be included for stabilisation or other purposes. And again, the specific uses or recommended uses for each of these materials are included in the data sheets to give some guidance around where you would likely want to use this material or how it could be incorporated into your design process. Go next slide, please. Okay, this is sort of a summary of the case studies. So yeah, as we mentioned, the aim was to try and find the oldest sort of examples of these materials that have been put into use, and there was one from 24 years ago at Fairfield City Council, which is probably the longest one we could find. So that sort of demonstrates to us that, you know, these are materials that have been in use for quite a long time, and again feeds into those concerns around, you know, how do they perform over that period of time, and will they hold up? And these case studies, as you can see, demonstrate in some cases that they do. In some cases, they show that they don't. And I think that's good to understand what are the issues that some of these councils have faced with trying to implement these sorts of materials. I think the lockup one was a good example, whereby the local supply was unavailable or became unavailable at some point, and so this sort of became cost prohibitive. So, you know, these are the issues that people are dealing with when they're trying to use this sort of material. It's good to understand that and go in there with both eyes open. We'll go next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of some of the considerations, we're obviously calling out the relevant design and specifications that the people want to use. This is looking at, I guess, the you know, the technical information around, you know, how to prepare this stuff, how to design for it, you know, levels and the like. But I think also the important one, which Muskan has mentioned earlier, is around that whole of life cost. And again, one of the things that we often hear from our members when we sort of talk about this type of material is that it often costs more upfront. Now, that isn't always the case. But we are trying to shift the focus there from, rather than looking at purely procurement as a part of a project, looking at that whole of life cost and saying, well, okay, it might cost you more upfront, but what are you saving over the longer term? And you know, is it going to cost you less when you need to try and rehabilitate this pavement at the end of its life, for example, or you know, are you going to be able to pull that material out of the ground and use it somewhere else? Or, you know, looking at it with a holistic perspective is to say, well, what's the cost over the life of the asset, you know, recycled material versus virgin material, trying to shift the narrative to that focus we think is important. And to that end, we are starting to do a bit of work in that space to try and tease out how people can do that. We have a tool that we have available on the RTD website that members are free, available to download, which looks at the transportation costs of that. But I know there's some work being done by a few state government departments on, I guess, a more comprehensive whole of life cost calculator. So as those things develop, we'll certainly be promoting them and encouraging the members to get involved with them as well. So the main specs, technical specs that we've called out in this guide are obviously the AUSPEC suite of documents, any from Transport for New South Wales, and then some at the Austroads level as well. So we're conscious there are others out there, and some suppliers may have their own sort of specs as well. But these are the 3 groups that we've stuck to as well, with some reference to a few of the Australian standards, just to try to keep it to the main ones that most councils would be familiar with. We'll go next slide, please, Muskan. Okay, so from an environmental and regulations perspective, the main things that we looked at were, you know, potential negative impacts to the environment and human health. There is some guidance rather around looking at the, you know, potential heavy metals and other hazardous or toxic materials, required tests or certifications that you would need to be assured that those things have been accommodated for. And in a lot of cases, these tests and the QA process will have been done by the supplier themselves. So I think the guidance there is more around making sure that if you're purchasing this sort of material, that you're actually getting the appropriate confirmation of that from the supplier, whoever that may be. We also pull out some of the, or refer to rather, some of the information from the POEA Act. And there's a lot of guidance from the EPA as well around the exemptions and the like that are required through the use of some of these materials. Muskan, did you want to add to that at all?
I think we've covered it. I think it's just more so that the recycled material shouldn't be an alternative form of landfill, just to sort of divert waste for the sake of diverting waste. It should more so be suitable for the application and just not actually go ahead and cause further negative impacts to the environment or human health.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point to raise. And I think some of the, the narrative around the use of recycled materials, it sometimes comes across as, oh, we'll just whack all this stuff in the road and it'll be buried and it'll be fine. It's like, well, no, you've got to consider, again, what happens at the end of the useful life of that asset. You've got to dig it up again and are you just creating problems or kicking the can down the road and leaving it for the next generation of engineers to deal with. So that's a very good point. We've certainly made sure that is a key consideration with this guide. All right, we'll go to the next slide, please. Yeah, okay, so stockpiling, transport and construction, there is certainly some guidance around stockpiling. A few things to note: that the stockpiling of recycled materials is typically more restrictive than the use of virgin materials. We've been working with the EPA on just trying to clarify the exact level of difference between the two. You can probably appreciate in some cases, so recycled crushed glass, for example, is very similar to virgin sand, but there are obviously some specific and important differences. Anyway, there is some guidance given around stockpiling of the 8 materials, and then some guidance around the EPA orders and exemptions that you would require if you're going to be stockpiling those materials. Transportation, again, as we've mentioned, trying to reduce the transport distances. We do have a tool that one of the student teams we worked with developed a couple of years ago that compares virgin versus recycled material sites around the state and allows you to put in your site location and sort of get the closest difference to each of those locations. So that's a good little one if you want to look at for calculating some of those transport impacts. But as I said, it really is probably more of a barrier in the regional areas where you've got to haul some of this stuff large distances. Having said that, have a look at that tool. It does give a pretty comprehensive overview of the sites that are available out there for these types of materials. And then construction, I mean, we don't want to reinvent the wheel with this guide. Obviously, there's a lot of information out there about how to build and construct road pavements. So this is really just building off the back of that and saying, well, here are some particular things to keep in mind when you're using these sorts of recycled materials that you need to be, extra careful when you're considering, your site controls and the like. Muskan, anything more you wanted to add to this slide?
No, I think it's good for this slide. Yeah.
Okay, all good. Thank you. We'll go to the next one. Work health and safety. So obviously you've got some of your standard WHS requirements. We've touched on those in the guides as well. Some of the key ones that people need to be aware of, obviously, as we mentioned, that the heavy metals, potentially asbestos if you're looking at crushed brick and the like, maybe from construction waste, if that's been used, there's potential contamination of asbestos. So obviously need to be conscious of that. And then certainly in the last couple of years with this increased focus on silica dust and the potential respiratory impacts of that to workers, there needs to be a lot of consideration of that with some of these materials as well. And then there's a few more specific controls around the use of some of these materials, which again we think we've given some general guidance on, but you're best to probably refer to the suppliers' control measures and information that they provide. We'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, so from a performance monitoring and maintenance perspective, we've given some guidance around, some of the things to, again, be extra conscious of when you're looking at this from a QA perspective. And I've also looked at, I guess, the long-term monitoring and maintenance with particular focus on some of the practice notes that are available through the IPWEA National Office. And there's a few specific ones called out there on screen. So where possible, we've certainly aligned with the work that they've produced, noting that they do have some similar work that they're doing at the moment, looking at related sort of areas. I think their focus is more from a climate resilience perspective, but that's something that you probably want to keep an eye out for coming out probably later this year or maybe early next year is my thinking. Well, Scott, anything you wanted to add to this slide at all?
So with the performance section, it mainly focuses on addressing the perceived risk with using recycled materials. And so it does go a little bit into addressing the long-term behavior of the recycled material compared to conventional materials that you might need to be aware of, such as the breakdown of fines or any impacts on like the permeability. And then also just as a way to encourage councils to continue monitoring and reporting on the long-term performance so that you have a set of results that you can compare with the performance of conventional pavement materials.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, I mentioned the Fairfield City Council case study. So here's a bit of an overview of that particular site. So we were able to get information out of Fairfield on at 3 points in time on this particular road. So you can see there on the left, that's the photo of this Delgado road before construction. And they use recycled concrete, I think, was this case study.
Yeah.
Yep. In the base layer. So you can see that in 2009, so 7 years after construction, it was performing quite well. And then the condition as of this year, I think there was in reasonably good condition. There's a little bit of crack formation, which had been some crack sealing put in place, but by and large was found to be in a pretty good condition. So I think this is a good example of one of the oldest case studies that we could find, 24 years performing well. So again, feeds into that narrative of these things do perform just as well as long as they're maintained and inspected as a part of any standard asset management routine. They certainly hold up over the longer term. Okay, and then end of life, obviously the focus here, given that we're talking recycled materials, is what's the recyclability of these materials. So what happens when they hit end of life? How can you repurpose them and use them in another cycle? Can they be put back into the same road pavement? Can they be used in another location or for other purposes? So I think that's one of the key considerations, and really that key sort of mind shift is to think about, well, you don't want to be putting things in the ground now or in the road now that are going to create issues down the road, as I mentioned earlier. So that's a really critical piece that people need to keep in mind when they're using these sorts of materials.
Yep, and also the particular material data sheets also call out where there's not enough research at the moment for some materials and where there is research and it can be recycled again and again.
Yeah, thanks, Pascal. Okay, and then the sustainable procurement section of the guide. This was sort of largely influenced by some work that the SS Rock have been doing, and we heavily leveraged off the resources that they produced to prepare this section of the guide. And as I mentioned, we'll be looking to sort of expand on this work in the future. But really, it's about, I guess, embedding that sort of approach to sustainable procurement into your organisation and making sure that it's considered as a part of that whole asset lifecycle process, and sort of saying, well, okay, it's no good just having the designers on board with this or just having the construction staff on board with this. It really needs to be an organisational level focus and needs to be embedded across all those various departments to be effective. Muskan, I might let you speak to this one if you like.
Sure. So with this, it's sort of a guide metrics that we've adapted with how SSROC have done theirs for evaluating the use of recycled materials, but instead it's been changed into the format to look at more so a recycled material. So for example, if there's a little bit of uncertainty about using the maximum allowable limit of, for example, recycled crushed glass, which may be at 10%. So instead of just using the business as usual case, which is no action taken regarding sustainability, you could begin with investigating and looking into possible considerations or applications, then moving into more sort of a minimal percentage use. So you could look at using possibly 2.5% and then monitoring the performance of this and any lessons learned, and then eventually moving on to higher percentages. So there's no requirement to jump right off the bat into the higher percentage. You can start off in the beginning and move up to it and then see how it goes and what's more suitable for the council and the application in particular.
Thanks, Pascal. Okay, and then we move into the material data sheet. So there's sort of an overview of one of the data sheets there. This is obviously on recycled crushed glass. And we'll run through this in a bit more detail over the next few slides, but there's 6 sections on each of the data sheets: design and spec, enviro and reg, stockpiling, transport and construction, work health and safety, performance monitoring, end of life. So that's the 6 considerations we just worked through in the slides, really summarising the information for each of these materials into a really handy 3 to 4 page technical document that you can just pull out of this guide, and we'll be making it available as a separate PDF. One thing to note is that as a part of this process, we certainly consulted quite widely and pulled in, I guess, some of the suppliers to provide some input to this as well. The intention is that the data sheets will become a bit of a living document. We'll update them as information evolves and as we sort of hear new updates from suppliers and from others. So expect to see us updating this on a pretty regular basis as the information continues to evolve, particularly for some of those ones that Muskan mentioned earlier where the research is not quite there yet. So they're slightly, evolving into, maturity in terms of, what the long-term impacts might be. So we're keeping a bit of a watching brief on those, and as more information becomes available, we'll certainly update the data sheets to reflect that. So this is just showing this particular data sheet in a bit more detail. So you can see here, the first section is the design and spec. Gives you a bit of an overview of where you would potentially apply it, which courses it would be used in, potential applications of it, broad properties, costs, and some of the considerations from a design perspective. The next one's calling out the specifications. So this, as I mentioned, we've got those four groups that we're referring to: OSPEC, transport, Roads, and any particular standards that are relevant. You can see there an example of alignment with the OSPEC subgroup. So this is coming from, was it 114 flexible pavements, and just showing the alignment or the linkages to the relevant specs for those who are OSPEC members. We've certainly, Nandini was one of the members of our working group, and was heavily involved in making sure that the information we presented in the data sheets was aligning to what OSPEC produces. And then you've obviously got transport. We've got quite a few documents that are related to the use of this material, and then some high-level guidance from Australians as well. From an environmental regulations perspective, so we've called out, I guess, the benefits, some of the potential heavy metal and or leaching risks attached to that, and as well as mitigation controls for those that people may want to be mindful of. And then particular call outs to the regs from an EPA perspective that you need to be across if you're going to be using this material. Under stock.
I think it might have cut off a little bit for Josh, so I can continue while his internet connects back in. So for the stockpiling, transport, and construction section, it mostly looks at if there are any special or different storage requirements compared to the natural aggregates or any other, like for example, sand with recycled crushed glass. It also discusses the controls that you can use, such as for dust suppression and also for erosion and sedimentation control. And then for construction, the section would discusses any specific requirements that may be needed for the recycled material, or otherwise if standard construction like placement and compaction and handling procedures can be used for that particular material. And then the work health and safety section also focuses on this. So in particular for recycled crushed glass, it's important that it's clean. So there may be crystalline silica present. It is at a lower volume compared to sand, but still just using the standard procedures and also referring to the material safety data sheets from the suppliers for additional guidance on the use of the recycled material.
Thanks, Muskan. Sorry about that, everyone. I just had a quick drop out, but I'm back now. So yeah, from a performance monitoring and maintenance perspective, yeah, we've provided again some sort of high level guidance there, or specific guidance there around the use of recycled crushed glass, and as it links to those particular applications. So as use in asphalt pavement base courses, pipe bedding and filling, and then in concrete. So that you've got a few different applications for the use of this material. Some guidance around the monitoring, and then some guidance around the maintenance for this material as well. And then the end of life section gives some information around the recommended advice from both Transport for New South Wales and the EPA as to how you can approach the particular considerations that you want to look at as a part of using this material. Muskan, did you want to add to that at all?
I think I'll just make reference to the differences between other materials. So for example, with recycled plastic, the end of life section is a little bit different because it discusses where research has been done and where more research is needed. And that follows through in the reclaimed asphalt pavement section as well, because by itself, it can be recycled again and again. But if there is an addition of other materials such as recycled plastic or crumb rubber, there may be additional processes or requirements that you have to look at before you can use it for end of life again.
Great, thank you. And the last section is the additional resources and references. So there's some additional resources we've called out there, ones that some people may be familiar with. In particular, ARB has done, or NTRO has done some work in this space in the past. There was also some work by Local Government New South Wales, which I don't think is called out specifically for this material, but it's certainly included in some of the other ones. And each of those is hyperlinked. So if you've got the digital version of the data sheets and you want to look at any of those resources, you can just click on the link and it should take you straight there. We've then also got the reference list, which again, I think most of those are hyperlinked. So if you wanted to go and read the technical, the research information, you'd be able to do that as well. Okay, look, as I mentioned, we had quite a few people involved in this project, and so I just we wanted to make mention of all of those that were involved. So this is the review panel, as we've called it, which is both the members of the working group, as well as some external people that we pulled in as well to help us, provide reviews on the guide. So we just like to acknowledge the contribution that all these people have made to the guide and to getting it to where it is today. Certainly, there's been some discussions, and nothing's set in stone as of yet. But I believe the intention is for moving forward that IPWEA will maintain a environment and sustainability focused technical panel, and that similar projects like this would be sort of falling under the portfolio of that, which has Rob Scott from Mid Coast Council as the director on our board, who's responsible for that portfolio area. All right, well, look, that brings us to the end of the formal presentation. So happy to take any questions and try and answer them, rather, that people may have. So as I mentioned, we've got a Q&A function. We've also got a chat function. So if you wanted to pop your questions or comments in there, we'd be happy to field them. And if I get stuck, I'll defer to Muskan as the knowledgeable person on the call who can answer them. Just while we're waiting, Muskan, for people to type in their questions, and I know you are going to cover this on the next slide as well. There will be a couple of opportunities for people to engage with this material in a bit more detail. I mentioned the state conference, so we'll be having hard copies of the guide available there. That is next week. So if you haven't got your tickets, you better act quickly because time is running out, and I think spaces are running out. So yeah, Muskan and I'll be there with the rest of the RTD team, and quite a few of the review panel members will likely be there as well. So that'll be a good chance to come and discuss the guide with us in more detail and get your hands on a hard copy. And then we're also looking at a presentation for the Local Roads Congress in June. That will be focused more at that sort of policy executive type level. So yeah, but if you are someone who normally comes to that event, you'll have an opportunity to hear a bit more about the work we've been doing on the 1st of June at New South Wales Parliament. All right, I don't know if we've got many questions coming in or any questions coming in. Haven't seen any yet. We'll give people a little bit more time. Just noting that, yeah, Trish has put in there in the chat about a couple of upcoming events, which I think was our next slide. If we go through to that one, let's go. There we go. So the next webinar will be the 20th of May, and that's an update on some of the work we've been doing with in the freight space with both Transport for New South Wales and the NHVR. So we'll have Scott from Transport and Braden from NHVR coming to speak about some of the work that they've been doing in that space. So that's the QR code if you want to register for that event there, or you'll see information from us about it through the newsletter and other channels that we promote. I have a question here. Is the guide available for download? Dean, I mentioned at the top that not yet is a short answer. So it's with the publisher at the moment. We're just getting it completely finished off, and it's out for printing. So we do, I believe, have the last digital version of the proof available. We haven't yet had a chance to get it up on the website. Obviously, our focus has been a bit on both getting this out, but also on preparing for state conference for next week. So we'll get it out up on the technical library as soon as we can. Our aim is to have it up sort of by state conference next week. But if it's not up, then it'll certainly be the week afterwards. And we'll promote that in our April newsletter when it goes out as well. Okay, well, look, I'm not seeing any more questions, so we might wrap it up there. Thank you all for coming along, for your attendance today. Thank you to Muskan for all of her hard work on both the guide and this presentation as well. And another sort of final acknowledgement to all of the review panel who helped contribute to this resource. So thank you for coming along today. And if I don't see you at State Conference, I hope to see you at the webinar next month.